Premanandi.
Very warm.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We're on the second canto, second chapter. And today's verse is number 3. Thank you very much. Ata kavir namasu yavad arta syad apramatto vyavasaya buddhi siddhe nyartarte nayate tatra parishramam tatra samanaha Ata kavir namasu yavad arta syad apramatto vyavasaya buddhi siddhe nyatarte nayate tatra parishramam tatra samikshamanaha. Ata kavir namasu yavad arta syad apramatto vyavasaya buddhi siddhe nyatarte nayate tatra parishramam tatra samikshamanaha. Please chant.
Atha kavir namasu yavadartha syada pramatto vyavasaya buddhi siddhenyatharthe nayate tatatra parishramam tatra samikshamana.
Ata kavir namasu yavadartha syayata parmato vyavasaya buddhi siddhenyatharthena yate tatra parishramam tatra samikshamana. Hare Krishna.
Ata kavir namasu yavadartha syada pramatto vyavasaya buddhi siddhe anyatharthe nayatate tatra parishramam tatra samiksha samana.
Hare Krishna. Atha kavir namasho yavadathartha syad aparmatto vyavasaya buddhaya siddhe nayate tanayate tatra parishramam tatra samishamanaha.
Anyone else? Okay. Ataha, for this reason, kavihi, the enlightened person, namasu, in names only, yavat, minimum, artaha, necessity, syat, must be, apramattaha, without being mad after them, vyavasaya buddhihi, intelligently fixed, siddhe, for success, anyatha, otherwise, arte, in the interest of, na, should never, yateta, endeavor for, tatra, there, parishramam, laboring hard, tatra, there, samikshamanaha, one who sees practically. Translation. For this reason, the enlightened person should endeavor only for the minimum necessities of life while in the world of names. He should be intelligently fixed and never endeavor for unwanted things, being competent to perceive practically that all such endeavors are merely hard labor for nothing. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Bhagavat Dharma, or the cult of Srimad Bhagavatam, is perfectly distinct from the way of fruitive activities, which are considered by the devotees to be merely a waste of time. The whole universe, or for that matter, all of material existence, is moving on as Jagat, simply for planning business to make one's position very comfortable or secure, although everyone sees that this existence is neither comfortable nor secure and can never become comfortable or secure at any stage of development. Those who are captivated by the illusory advancement of material civilization, following the way of phantasmagoria, are certainly madmen. The whole material creation is a jugglery of names only. In fact, it is nothing but a bewildering creation of matter like earth, water, and fire. The buildings, furniture, cars, bungalows, mills, factories, industries, peace, war, or even the highest perfection of material science, namely atomic energy and electronics, are all simply bewildering names of material elements with their concomitant reactions of the three modes. Since the devotee of the Lord knows them perfectly well, he is not interested in creating unwanted things for a situation which is not at all reality, but simply names of no more significance than the babble of sea waves. The great kings, leaders, and soldiers fight with one another in order to perpetuate their names in history. They are forgotten in due course of time, and they make a place for another era in history. But the devotee realizes how much history and historical persons are useless products of flickering time. The fruitive worker aspires after a big fortune in the matter of wealth, woman, and worldly adoration. But those who are fixed in perfect reality are not at all interested in such false things. For them, it is all a waste of time. Since every second of human life is important, an enlightened man should be very careful to utilize time very cautiously. 1 second of human life wasted in the vain search of planning for happiness in the material world can never be replaced, even if one spends millions of coins of gold. Therefore, the transcendentalist, desiring freedom from the clutches of Maya, or the illusory activities of life, is warned herewith not to be captivated by the external features of fruitive actors. Human life is never meant for sense gratification, but for self-realization. Srimad Bhagavatam instructs us solely on this subject from the very beginning to the end. Human life is simply meant for self-realization. The civilization which aims at this utmost perfection never indulges in creating unwanted things. And such a perfect civilization prepares men only to accept the bare necessities of life or to follow the principle of the best use of a bad bargain. Our material bodies and our lives in that connection are bad bargains because the living entity is actually spirit, and spiritual advancement of the living entity is absolutely necessary. Human life is intended for the realization of this important factor, and one should act accordingly, accepting only the bare necessities of life and depending more on God's gift without diversion of human energy for any other purpose, such as being mad for material enjoyment. The materialistic advancement of civilization is called the civilization of demons, which ultimately ends in wars and scarcity. The transcendentalist is specifically warned herewith to be fixed in mind, so that even if there is difficulty in plain living and high thinking, he will not budge even an inch from his stark determination. For a transcendentalist, it is a suicidal policy to be intimately in touch with the sense gratifiers of the world, because such a policy will frustrate the ultimate gain of life. Shukadeva Goswami met Maharaj Parikshit when the latter felt a necessity for such a meeting. It is the duty of a transcendentalist to help persons who desire real salvation and to support the cause of salvation. One might note that Shukadeva Goswami never met Maharaj Parikshit while he was ruling as a great king. For a transcendentalist, the mode of activities is explained in the next shloka. So the translation again. For this reason, I should give context here. So for this reason, referring to yesterday's verse, I was talking about how the language of the Vedas can be bewildering and can entice one to heavenly pleasures. So then today's verse, for this reason, the enlightened person should endeavor only for the minimum necessities of life while in the world of names. He should be intelligently fixed and never endeavor for unwanted things, being competent to perceive practically that all such endeavors are merely hard labor for nothing. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminate Namane Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pacharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatu Deshtarne Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyas Chakrapa Sindhubhya Eva Chapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So, just a little more context on this verse. We gave a little just now. So, for this reason, in quotes there, which is how the verse started. Again, it's referring to yesterday's verse, which mentions how the language of the Vedas can be bewildering and can misdirect the intelligence of conditioned souls to aspire for heavenly pleasures. And Sri Krishna himself confirms this in Bhagavad Gita, in verse 253, that the Vedas can distract one from the path of divine consciousness. In that verse, he says, when your mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. But then we also have other quotes from Bhagavad Gita and elsewhere. One was quoted in yesterday's class from Ramcharan Prabhu, 15:15, Vedaischa sarva mahameva vedyo. Of all the Vedas, Krishna is to be known, That is the sole purpose of the Vedas. That was also mentioned in today's purport. To bring everyone to know Krishna. So if that's the case, if the whole Vedas is just meant to bring one to Krishna, then why would the language of the Vedas be bewildering? It seems strange. If all that's doing is telling you how to get to Krishna, then what would be bewildering about it, right? And we get the answer to this question. It's a good question, right? If the whole Vedas is meant to bring one to Krishna, then what's the question of it being bewildering? It should be quite simple. It has the same purpose no matter where you're looking at it. But we get the answer to that question, and it's a good question. Like I said, I lose words sometimes. I'm not going to find that one. Sorry. So, but the point is that would be a common or a very obvious question to have when confronted with these two statements, that the flowery language of the Vedas can distract us from our ultimate goal, and all of the Vedas is meant to bring us to Krishna, which is the ultimate goal. So when we get these two quotations, it can be somewhat bewildering, and we can question, how is that even possible? But as I mentioned, the answer to this is given in the first canto, chapter 5, where Narada Muni instructs his disciple, Srila Vyasadeva, in order to just address his despondency in compiling the Vedas, right? So we've gone through that section. Although Srila Vyasadeva did a wonderful job in considering all of the different levels of fallen souls and giving authorized instructions to gradually bring them to know Krishna through various methods in the various Vedic literatures that he compiled, since he had to give some concessions to those who were materially attached to gradually elevate their consciousness, Narada Muni, his guru, pointed out that unscrupulous people would take these material concessions and disregard the spiritual principles, and therefore engage in enjoyment in the name of religion. And therefore he advised his disciple to now just write a Purana that is free from such things, a spotless Amala Purana, that simply describes the glories of the Supreme Lord. In text 15 of that chapter, first canto, chapter 5, Narada Muni explains, quote, "The people in general are naturally inclined to enjoy, and you have encouraged them in that way in the name of religion. This is verily condemned." The Sanskrit word used there is jugupsitam, condemned, and is quite unreasonable. Because they are guided under your instructions, they will accept such activities in the name of religion and will hardly care for prohibitions. That's text 15. Then in the next verse, 16, he continues, "The Supreme Lord is unlimited. Only a very expert personality retired from the activities of material happiness deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values." So only a person, a very expert personality retired from the activities of material happiness, deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. Therefore, those who are not so well situated due to material attachment should be shown the ways of transcendental realization by your goodness through descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord. This is where Narada Muni is instructing Srila Vyasadeva to compile the Bhagavat Purana, which is what we're studying right now, so that there's no question of people becoming distracted by these different concessions for material enjoyment that are offered, for example, in the Karmakanda section of the Vedas. So we can think of the Vedas as a map of the entire world, right? Just, it's got all the roads, all the mountains, all the rivers, all the different landmarks, all of that is on, but for the whole entire world. So we are situated at some point on that map, whole map of the world, we're somewhere on that map. And our goal is to get to another point on the map. So for example, I'm currently situated in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. And many of you are in Philadelphia right now. So if my goal is to visit you in Philadelphia, then I can disregard most of the world map, right? The information on the map about all of the other countries besides North America does not pertain to me right now. So I can disregard those. And even within North America, the information about Canada, Mexico, Guatemala, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Cuba, they're also irrelevant for my trip. So I can disregard those, right? And then I can similarly disregard the information on the map about 49 out of the 50 states in the USA, as well as the 5 inhabited territories, the 9 uninhabited territories, and the 2 disputed territories of the USA, right? All I have to look at is Pennsylvania. And even within the Pennsylvania map, I can disregard most of that, right? Because we're just on the eastern side, and it's really just a small corridor. It's not that far. So all of those other sections of that world map are irrelevant to my journey. But if I'm situated somewhere else on that map and I want to visit Philly, some of those other parts of the map are not. They're not only relevant, but they're absolutely necessary. So all of the map is useful for someone. There's no part of the map that is completely useless. So for example, a week and a half ago, I was in Kentucky, right? So it's a completely different state. So I would have to just use more of that map, right? And there's no part of the map that's completely useless because someone is situated somewhere there. And if they're trying to get somewhere, they need, you know, that particular part of the map. So, and then here's where it gets fun, right? Let's say we don't know where we're situated on the map, right? Nor do we know where we're going. We woke up in a strange and unfamiliar place. We have this world map that can help us navigate to anywhere else in the world. But since we don't know where we are starting, we can easily be misled, right? We can observe that, okay, well, here's a river, right? And then there's a road that runs parallel to that river. So we look at the world map for that sort of landmark. But the problem is we'll find countless occurrences of roads running parallel to rivers because that's just what happens. There's a river, right? And then someone builds a road next to it, either because it's convenient because the river generally runs not exactly level, but level enough that, you know, a car can also drive on that hill, because otherwise maybe there's a mountain next to the river too. It's harder to climb over a mountain than it is to follow that. Plus, people like to be near the water, so we build roads near rivers all the time. So just in Pennsylvania alone, you would find that occurrence many times. But if you don't even know you're in Pennsylvania, you'd be looking all over the world for roads that run alongside of rivers. And it would be very difficult to narrow down where you're coming from. Even if you went off exploring, all right, well, let's see if the river bends in a certain way, and let's see if the road separates at any point. It wouldn't be a very fruitful way to solve our problem. So now let's get back to the Vedas. Many different grades of rebellious living entities engaging in so many different types of sinful activities. And since the Vedas is meant for everyone and is meant to bring one to knowledge of Sri Krishna, the Vedas, like the world map, has a lot of information that is irrelevant to most people, but is absolutely necessity for someone else, right? So just because there are parts of the Vedas that don't pertain to us doesn't mean that they're useless. They're definitely necessary for someone else. Thus, there are sections of the Vedas that would be distracting from the true goal for us due to its flowery language, and especially due to our conditioned nature to enjoy and exploit anything and everything around us. So Srila Narada Muni is suggesting that Srila Vyasadeva present the map along with the essential tools to determine one's position and one's true destination, so that everyone can have the opportunity to use the map properly, right? If you just have a map, like I said, you might have trouble determining where you are and where you even want to go. But if you give the instruments to help find out where you are and to help determine what is the best place to go, then that is quite beneficial. So as we read in the 16th verse of the 5th chapter of the 1st canto. Only a very expert personality retired from the activities of material happiness deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. Right? One has to be materially frustrated, completely retired from those material activities, and very expert personality. And then only does one deserve to understand the knowledge of spiritual values. So Srila Narada Muni advised Srila Vyasadeva to narrate the glories of the Supreme Lord, so that those of us who do not meet this description, right? I don't meet that description. Not many people in this material world do, because that's the whole purpose of this material world. So if we don't meet that description, then Srila Vyasadeva is advised to narrate the glories of the Supreme Lord, so that those of us who aren't expert and retired from the activities of material happiness can be shown the ways of transcendental realization. And being shown those ways of transcendental realization, that lets us know where we are situated on the map. And it helps us determine where we want to go, right? The more we understand our relationship, our sambandha, the relationship between us and the Supreme Lord, what the position is, what the relationship is, the more we will naturally come to this point of not seeking material pleasures, because we'll understand that they're pale. They're not. They cannot satisfy the living entity, as today's purport pointed out. This world of names, nothing can satisfy the eternal living entity, because it's all temporary here. So we, being eternal beings, cannot be satisfied here. So this is actually the way that we are to discuss Shastra, and this is how Lord Chaitanya did it. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there are several instances where Lord Chaitanya broke our philosophy down to Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Sambandha means our relationship, as I mentioned. Abhideya is the process that we follow in order to successfully reach our goal. And Prayojana is the goal, which is for us love of Godhead. For all living entities, that is the ultimate goal. We may have sub-goals. Currently, our goal is to enjoy this material world, which isn't a proper goal, because we don't understand our proper relationship. If we don't have proper sambandha, then we won't have the proper proposed prayojana, and therefore we're not going to follow the proper abhideya, right? So when Lord Chaitanya was instructing the Mayavad sannyasis in Varanasi, this would be in, this is narrated in Adi Leela chapter 7, and this verse is 146. He says, one's relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sambandha, activities in terms of that relationship, Abhideya, and the ultimate goal of life, Prayojana, to develop love of God. These three subjects are explained in every aphorism of the Vedanta Sutra, for they form the culmination of the entire Vedanta philosophy. So all of the Vedanta philosophy culminates in these three things: understanding who we are in relationship to the Supreme Lord, understanding how to act within that knowledge, within that relationship, the proper way to deal with everything in that relationship, and then the goal, if we successfully are able to properly follow that Abhideya. Also, when Lord Chaitanya instructed Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, this will be in Madhya Lila, 6th chapter, this is verse 178. He says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the central point of all relationships. Relationships is Sambandha. Acting in devotional service to him is one's real occupation. That's the Abhideya. and the attainment of love of Godhead is the ultimate goal of life, prayojana. These three subject matters are described in the Vedic literature. And then also, while instructing Srila Sanatana Goswami, also in Varanasi, he gave elaborate instructions on Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. After giving an overview of the three in chapter 20 of Madhya Lila, each of the three, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, have their own dedicated chapter, and that's chapters 21, 22, and 23 of Madhya Lila. They give very detailed descriptions, explanations of what Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana are, and why it's important for us to understand. So this is the way we are to discuss, to understand the Vedas. It's not that just a map is thrown in front of us and we try to figure it out. It's we have to determine through authorized means where exactly we're situated, what's our relationship between where we are and where we want to go, and what's the process to get from where we are to where we want to go, right? So our process, the process of Krishna consciousness, is to determine first where we are situated on the map. That's Sambandha. What is our relationship to the Supreme Lord in the context of our current situation? Then the second thing is what our proper destination is. So I'm doing these three in a slightly different order in this case. So that's the Prayojana. So where are we? Where do we want to go? What's the proper destination? And our Prayojana is to develop love of God. And then third, how to get from where we are to where we want to be. So where are we situated now? Right now, I'm engaged in various materialistic activities, but I know that I want to, my goal is to attain love of Godhead and to just reawaken that consciousness where everything is centered around Krishna. And so the process, how to get there, is to follow the Vedic process, hearing, chanting, remembering, etc. The process that was given to us by our Srila Prabhupada and by the previous acharyas and by Krishna himself. All right. And so that's the Abhideya. And that's what the Srimad Bhagavatam will help us do. It helps us understand where we are, where we should be going, and how to get there, right? If we approach the Srimad Bhagavatam with sincerity and determination, and then, of course, under the guidance of our guru and other sadhus, and we follow those instructions, then we will become successful in devotional service. So my first instinct when reading today's verse was to speak extensively on Upadeshamrita verses 2 and 3. It's a list of things that are favorable to devotional service and a list of things that are unfavorable to devotional service. And when I finally get to that, I will in a moment, you'll see how it very much is parallel with today's verse, because it's all about not acquiring too many things, not giving so much endeavor to accumulate things in the world of names, right? And then I was also going to give a bunch of quotes from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's book Bhakti Aloka, which is his commentary on those two verses. But I'm still going to do that in a much briefer form because we just went over this other stuff. But first, before we read those verses and some of those quotes, I want to explain why we took the scenic route to get there. Because, like I said, my first instinct was just directly to go into that because it's very much the on the same lines of today's verse. But the reason I went over this idea of how sometimes we can become confused by quotes that tell us, on one hand, of all of the Vedas, Krishna is to be known. So every part of the Vedas, including Karma Kanda section, are meant to bring one toward knowledge of Krishna, to know Krishna. And then you have other quotes talking about how one should be careful because the flowery language of the Vedas can become distracting to us, right? So because we have these quotes, there is a tendency, especially in this material world, to misuse those quotes, to either choose one or the other, and to just to accept the information in a very unhealthy way, just depending on what our material situation is. And that's unfortunate, right? So there's a very unfortunate common misinterpretation in our society, and I don't mean human society, I mean the society of aspiring Vaishnavas, that Vedic culture is unnecessary, irrelevant, outdated, antiquated, impractical, and so forth. I've heard all these terms being used to describe what the Vedas is, right? And unfortunately, it's being spread across the devotee community. It's not just that some people have this misunderstanding, it's that people are convincing others also. And they're saying, no, you don't even have to worry about any of that stuff, right? So it's easy to see how this misinterpretation came about. You know, you have these quotes about the flowery language of the Vedas and how it can bewilder and misguide us if we're not careful, don't have the proper guidance. And it's even less surprising that this idea is popular, right? So it's easy to see why there's that misunderstanding. It's also easy to see why it's popular, because conditioned living entities will take any excuse whatsoever to disregard rules and regulations and just try to live our lives according to what we currently perceive as being practical. But today's verse, which is a continuation from yesterday's, shows us that this is the mentality of a madman, right? In today's purport, Srila Prabhupada wrote, the whole universe, or for that matter, all of material existence, is moving on as Jagat, simply for planning business to make one's position very comfortable or secure, although everyone sees that this existence is neither comfortable nor secure, and can never become comfortable or secure at any stage of development. Those who are captivated by the illusory advancement of material civilization following the way of phantasmagoria are certainly madmen. End quote. We are in a world of names. We are dealing with a reflection, but we're yearning for the real substance, right? Because we're spirit soul, we're eternal. So we're looking for eternality, but we're only dealing in the material world with the reflection of that eternal reality. So basically, we're playing with sand, but we're yearning for something that actually has substance. We cannot be satisfied here, as Srila Prabhupada points out. And to continually try to be satisfied in this material world, to try to make it a better place, to in any way think it's superior to the spiritual world, to think that this is a place worthy of spending time or accumulating anything, is simply madness, as Srila Prabhupada points out. So the reason that we're taking this scenic route, before we get to the Upadekshamrita, is that if one shares this popular misperception that the Vedas and Vedic culture are unnecessary, outdated, impractical, antiquated, etc., then one will simply dismiss the verses that I'm about to read as fanatical or irrelevant to our current situation. And that's very dangerous, and it's very detrimental to our spiritual advancement, right? Because sometimes we hear this. We see devotees, aspiring devotees, they'll read a certain section of verses and they'll think, wow, that's pretty austere, or that's for someone that's very advanced, you know, that's for something that should come along later at some other point. But if you read, and I highly recommend Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Bhakti Loka, he actually breaks it down. Maybe I can get to that point. It doesn't look like I'll have time, but he even breaks it down to what it means if you're a grihasta, what it means if you're a renunciate, right? So we may think, well, oh yeah, I'm a householder, so I don't have to, I don't have to worry about giving up these things. It's actually my duty to accumulate and to provide for the family. But Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur points out that it's the mentality that we have to deal with. We have to. There can be things that we're utilizing in Krishna's service, yukta vairagya, but the mentality, the proper mentality has to be there, that one understands that all of it's coming from Krishna, and that all of it has to be used in a very specific way to please Krishna's senses, not to please our senses, not for our comfort, not for our security. This is all for Krishna, and we have to use it in that very specific way. So to think that there are verses in our Shastra that are fanatical or irrelevant to our current situation, especially that, to think it's irrelevant to our current situation. We think, oh yeah, that's how things were back then, but now society has evolved. We like to say things like that. And so then these things are impractical now. It's, we can't do them. We live a different way now. The Vedas are somehow irrelevant for us. It's very dangerous and, like I said, detrimental. So to revisit verse 1.5.16, again, it said, only a very expert personality retired from the activities of material happiness deserves to understand this knowledge of spiritual values. This was Narada Muni's instruction to Srila Vyasadeva. He continues, therefore, those who are not so well situated due to material attachment should be shown the ways of transcendental realization by your goodness through descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord. End quote. So at some point, we do have to become experts, and we have to retire from the activities of material happiness if we want to understand spiritual values. It works like a scale, right? Like a balance scale. You put weight on this side and this side goes up. You put weight on this side and that side goes down, right? This is self-realization and sense gratification. Srila Prabhupada talked about that in today's purport. And that's what all the Vedas is talking about. It's what all of the Shastras is talking about. They are diametrically opposed. You can't go like this, as my guru says. We try to do this. We try to increase our material sense gratification because, well, it feels good. And we also try to increase our self-realization because we know that we want to eventually, we know that there's something more than this. But the issue is, as long as we're holding on to material enjoyment, which is illusory, it's like we have our hands full of sand, as I mentioned earlier, and we're trying to grab onto the lotus feet of Krishna. And as long as we have our hands full, we can't do that. We might say, oh, no, you just be creative. Hook your elbow over his feet. You can still hold on to your sand, and it'll take you there. But that's not how this works, because the spiritual world, this mentality, this consciousness of trying to enjoy something separately from Krishna doesn't exist. It's not there. It's only here in the material world where that happens. So as long as there's that mentality, as long as we're even grasping onto one grain of that illusion, then we can't go back to the spiritual world. We have to purify ourselves of all of this, right? So if we're engaging in sense gratification, we're neglecting self-realization. That's how that works. If we are not expert because of material attachment, we should read the descriptions of the transcendental activities of the Supreme Lord, as Srila Narada Muni suggests, so that we will lose our tastes for the pale material world by reawakening our attachment for the Supreme Lord. Either way, we have to retire from the pursuit of material happiness before we can engage properly in spirituality. And as such, we should take heed to these instructions while we are in the world of names. So now I'm going to read Upadeshamrita, verses 2 and 3, and you'll see how it's very much parallel to what we're discussing in today's verse. And I'm just going to do this briefly because we already spent a lot of time. But like I said, it was necessary to sort of take this scenic route to get here because it's such a common thing. And if someone holds that belief, then when reading these things, we'll just think, oh, okay, that's maybe something that I have to worry about at some point later in my life, or that's fanatical, it's impractical. I don't even have to worry about that at all. So this is verse 2. This is Srila Rupa Goswami's Upadeshamrita, and then Srila Prabhupada, he commented on that, and it's called the Nectar of Instruction. So verse 2. One's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities. So I'm going to read that again. One's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I certainly don't want to spoil my devotional service. Therefore, I'm going to pay attention to what these 6 activities are that will spoil it, so I make sure I don't do those. First one, eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required. 2, over endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. 3, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. Oh, thank you. Let's see if I can get back to my screen. Okay. 4, and this is a very important one because there's 2 sides to this one. And it's very important to understand both sides of this one. As I mentioned, when we have statements, like I mentioned earlier today, there's a couple statements about the Vedas. One is that of all the Vedas, Krishna is to be known. So that shows that the purpose of all of the Vedas is to understand Krishna, even the Karmakanda sections of it. But then we also have statements like the flowery language of the Vedas can become distracting and can actually bewilder us so that we're distracted into trying to enjoy heavenly pleasures instead of actually, engaging in proper spirituality. So number 4, practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement. That's half of number 4. So that's if one takes the fanatical approach. Now, there actually is a fanatical approach where you're following the rules and regulations, but you don't know, you're not following them to actually understand Krishna, to actually make spiritual advancement. You're just following them for the sake of following them. Or maybe you're following them so that you can enjoy in the heavenly planets, for example. So that is one thing that will spoil your devotional service. The other half of that, because these are both about using Shastra in the wrong way. So one is following it, but not for the sake of spiritual advancement, so not to understand Krishna. And then the other one is rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. Now, this is the one that the reason why we took the scenic route was so we avoid this one. Because we all have seen examples of people being fanatical. They're following the rules and regulations to a T, but they're missing the point, right? And the point is to understand Krishna, to know Krishna, right? And when we see things like that, our tendency as conditioned living entities is to then reject. So we see someone misusing something, we want to reject it, right? We throw that baby away with that bathwater. We lock the bathroom door. We burn down the house. We leave the state, and let alone the state, we leave the country. We leave it all behind, right? This is what we tend to do. But if we do that, as this points out in number 4, the second half of number 4, if we reject the rules and regulations of the scriptures and we work independently or whimsically, that is also a misuse of the Shastra, because the Shastra is given by Krishna and it is meant for us to come back to him gradually. So if we think or consider that the rules and regulations that are given in the Vedas are outdated, antiquated, impractical, etc., but somehow we've come up with another method that is more effective because it's what people in today's society consider to be, so-called practical. If we do that, then we are creating an unnecessary disturbance in society. So that's also a problem, and that will also spoil our devotional service. So that's number 4. So both extremes of taking not approaching scriptures in the right way. So approaching it in a fanatical way is wrong, but also dismissing it is also wrong. So we have to approach Shastra in a very specific way, and that is to understand Krishna, because of all the Vedas, I am to be known. So if that's our mood and that's our determination and sincerity, then it will be effective. Otherwise, we will not be able to understand Krishna. Okay, so the 5th thing that will spoil our devotional service is associating with worldly-minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And the 6th thing that will spoil our devotional service is being greedy for mundane achievements. Now, there's a part that I want to read in this purport. It's pretty far down. Let's see if I can. Oh, Oh, I thought, okay. Let's see if I can find it here. No, there we are. So in Srila Prabhupada's commentary to this, and again, this book is amazing. It's brief, but it has a whole lot of instruction. So if one hasn't studied this, or even if you have, I recommend reading it many times. And then also Bhakti-aloka, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's book. So Srila Prabhupada writes in this purport, if people are advised not to collect too many goods, eat too much, or work unnecessarily to possess artificial amenities, they think they are being advised to return to a primitive way of life. Generally, people do not like to accept plain living and high thinking. That is their unfortunate position. Human life is meant for God realization, and the human being is given higher intelligence for this purpose. Those who believe that this higher intelligence is meant to attain a higher state should follow the instructions of the Vedic literatures. By taking such instructions from higher authorities, one can actually become situated in perfect knowledge and give real meaning to life. Right? So first, Srila Prabhupada pointed out that when they are advised not to collect too much, not to eat too much, not to work unnecessarily to possess artificial amenities, they actually considered that going backwards, returning to a primitive way of life and being less advanced, right? And as Srila Prabhupada points out, that's their unfortunate position because they don't understand that human life is meant for God realization. So cutting back on these things which are binding us, chaining us to this material world is actually progress. It's not returning to a primitive way of life in the sense that we're moving backwards. You're actually moving forward toward Krishna by letting go of the shadow, right? Returning just to the substance. Then I'll also read verse 3. So we've already heard the 6 things that will spoil our devotional service. So now let's read the 6 things that will they're favorable to the execution of devotional service, right? So these 6 things will then help out. This is verse 3. 1, being enthusiastic. 2, endeavoring with confidence. 3, being patient. 4, acting according to the regulative principles, such as Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, hearing, chanting, and remembering Krishna. 5, abandoning the association of non-devotees. And 6, following in the footsteps of the previous acharyas. These 6 principles undoubtedly assure the complete success of pure devotional service. Undoubtedly complete success. So we should take heed to these. I want to point out, if you look at these 2 verses side by side, so there's 6 things, and they work together. They run parallel. So the first thing that was detrimental was eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required, right? And the first one on the list of the things that are favorable is being enthusiastic. So those 2 can actually be confused because we see that if someone's being very productive, we say, wow, they're well, in ISKCON lingo, we say they're fired up. They're very productive. Yeah, they're fired up. It means they're enthusiastic, right? But in verse 2, that enthusiasm is toward material accumulation. And in verse 3, the enthusiasm we're talking about is being enthusiastic to advance in spirituality by following the Shastra. So enthusiasm is not a good or a bad thing in and of itself. It depends on what we're enthusiastic about. So if we're enthusiastic about collecting things or eating or things like that, then that's detrimental. But if we're enthusiastic about getting to know Krishna and engaging in his service, then that's favorable. Then the second one, for the detrimental, is over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. And in the things that are favorable, it's endeavoring with confidence. So they're both talking about endeavoring, right? But the first one is talking about endeavoring for mundane things. And the second, the favorable one, is talking about endeavoring with confidence. Confidence means, according to Shastra, we understand that this is truth. This isn't some speculation. So this is something worth actually having, so we can endeavor with confidence, right? Otherwise, if we're just endeavoring for these mundane things that are very difficult to obtain, it's just going to further bind us to the material world. Then the third item in the things that spoil devotional service, talking unnecessary about mundane subject matters. And that's in the 6 favorable things. The third one is being patient, right? So if we are talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters, this is the example of the frog who is croaking in the nighttime. They're very eager to sing their song, right? To tell everybody about all their nonsense, right? But as Srila Prabhupada points out, that they're just inviting the snake. They're letting the snake know where they are. Here I am, I'm right here. And so this dangerous snake comes and just eats the frog, right? Ends his life. So when we talk unnecessarily about things that are, all we're doing is inviting further bondage to this material world. But on the other hand, if we are patient, if we are patient and we only speak with, again, confidence, as mentioned in the second item, because of things that are mentioned in the Shastra, if we're patient enough to hear from the Shastra and then only repeat those things and not talk about these mundane things, then that's favorable. The fourth item, which is detrimental, is the proper way to follow Shastra. Not that one should follow it rigidly and fanatically, but not understand the point of it, and one should also not reject it, thinking that they've come up with some other idea. That's the detrimental. And the favorable one is acting according to the regulative principles, such as Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, right? So understanding the proper way to follow. So the first list shows us the 2 ways not to follow Shastra, to either do it fanatically without doing it for the purpose of self-realization, and also to reject it. One shouldn't do either of those. One should do it properly in order to understand Krishna, to know Krishna better. The fifth detrimental item, associating with worldly minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And then we have the fifth item in the favorable things, abandoning the association of non-devotees. So they're the very same. One is avoiding the non-devotees and one is abandoning the association of non-devotees. And then 6, the detrimental, being greedy for mundane achievements. And number 6 in the favorable, following in the footsteps of the previous acharyas. So here we see that when we're greedy for mundane achievements, we're following in the footsteps of those materialists before us who have had some success, right? We look at those who have had some sort of material success, those who are famous, rich, highly intelligent, beautiful, etc. Anyone in the material world who has any sort of reflection of any of the 6 opulences, that's detrimental. But if instead of following in their footsteps, if we follow in the footsteps of those who practice spirituality properly, then that is favorable to devotional service. So again, let's see where we are here. So then again, the determining factor is whether or not we are trying to get to know Krishna properly, whether we understand our sambandha, the position, our proper position, if we know the prayojana, what our proper goal is, and if we know the abhideya, the process of how to get from where we are to where we want to be. And that's what we're looking to. So I've gone longer than I should have, and I apologize for that. But this was very important to understand in that context, because again, it's a very common misunderstanding that's being perpetuated through our society. And so I wanted to point out why it's important to understand that, and also why it's important to see that these instructions today, it's talking about not accumulating so many things. And, that's what we do. We accumulate things and we just say, well, that's our duty. We have to maintain body and soul. But the things we consider as necessities these days, they're absolutely not necessary, most of them, right? And that's because we have more faith in material nature than we do in Krishna. And that's unfortunate to say, but it's true. If we examine it, if we assess our value system, where do we place our faith, our time, our energy, our money, our efforts? Is it more toward being materially comfortable and entertained and satisfied and situated, or is it more toward spiritual advancement? And if we're honest with ourselves, we can see, okay, no, I still have very many material attachments. And so if we assess that and we redirect our consciousness from self-centric to God-centric, as described in the Shastras, as instructed by the Guru, and as shown the examples by the sadhus, then we can actually make some spiritual advancement. But if we just either follow the Vedas but without the intention of actually making spiritual advancement, if maybe we're trying to make some material advancement, we're distracted by the flowery language of the Vedas, and we're excited about getting some heavenly pleasures. Or if we're rejecting the Vedas and we're thinking, no, that's fanatical, or it's not applicable to our current system, because now we're material society has evolved and we have so many so much technology that makes it easier, better, faster, whatever. These are both very immature ways to approach the Shastra and spirituality. So it's important that we understand how to do it. And even if we can't do it, even if we have such a strong material attachment that we're still impelled to live our lives the way we seem fit, disregarding Shastra. But at least if we know that eventually we are to follow Shastra, then gradually, because of that sincerity and that determination, Krishna will reveal to us how to properly follow these instructions. He'll give the proper instructions and we'll naturally follow it. It's not that we have to force ourselves to do anything. This will be a natural progression. We just need to have that determination and sincerity. So let me stop here. And I'm sorry for going over, but hopefully there are some questions or comments or further discussion on this matter. Sita Devi Dasi, Hare Krishna.
Krishna Prabhu, it's a humble obeisances, Jai Shri Prabhupada. Thank you for bringing up such important points. One thing that I have a question about is, if we should abandon non-devotee association, right? So, for work, I keep my distance. I don't get to, they're not part of my life, right? It's just, I go to work, get my work done, out. But family who are not Krishna conscious, how do we abandon those? That's my question.
So the first thing I want to do is define association, because we have misdefined the word association in a major way, and it's detrimental to us in a big way. When even this term sadhu sangha, and I've gone over this before, but it's important to understand. Sadhu sangha, we generally think of, it's association with devotees, but I have seen, and this is an unfortunate phenomenon, that people just figure if they're anywhere near other devotees, that's association of devotees, right? So if they're eating lunch together or whatever, that's association. If they're watching movies together, if they're playing games together. Association, the word sangha, it actually means there has to be this identification. You have to be taking the sadhu is those who follow the sat principles, the eternal principles. So one has to be not only recognizing those eternal principles from that individual, but one has to also imbibe those qualities within oneself, or aspire to cultivate those qualities within. And that's what association means. Association means I'm identifying with that quality and then I'm trying to cultivate it. right? So it's important to understand what association means for two reasons. One is so that we actually take full advantage of being in proximity to sadhus, not just being in the proximity, but to actually identify what about these people, what makes them special, what makes them advanced, because of those sat principles. Now, how do I also develop those sat principles? That transaction needs to happen in order for it to be association. Otherwise, it's just proximity. Same thing goes for abandoning the association of non-devotees. It doesn't mean that you can't be anywhere near any non-devotees. It means that you shouldn't be having that transfer. You shouldn't see, okay, so you have family members that are maybe non-devotees, and let's say some of them are materially successful, right? Associating with them would be to see that they're materially successful and then follow in their footsteps, trying to become materially successful. But you still can hang out with them if that's not what your intention is. If you're not trying to follow in their material footsteps, right, then you're not actually associating with them. Now, I want to point out that this needs a disclaimer, because then it's best to, whenever possible, also avoid proximity of people who are very materially minded, especially if we're not very advanced in spirituality. If we are more advanced in spirituality, then we can be stronger, and then we can be in those situations and not be affected. But it's not the kind of thing that you want to play with. You don't want to think, oh, well, Krishna is going to get my back, no problem. Krishna gets your back if you're holding on. If you're not holding on, you're in the material world, so you're going to get knocked around. So we have to understand that. So it's not that we should, just jump into any situation and think, that I can handle it. But at the same time, we shouldn't avoid completely our family. There are some situations where, okay, even if they're the worst materialist in the world, there are some situations where you're going to have proximity, and that's okay, that's fine. But we have to understand what association means, and so we can be near these people without actually associating with them. So we should actually properly associate with devotees, not just be near them. And if we are near non-devotees, we shouldn't associate with them, if that makes sense. Is that good, Mother Sita?
Yes, it is. It's I understand. So giving association and taking association, and that's there. At this time, you're consciously and unconsciously, if there is someone who is like, not against what you're doing, but they're not into it themselves either. And if you are with them, if you're spending so much time with them, then you're kind of like unconsciously also things happen to you. You don't want to be them, but if you are with them so much, then unconsciously also there's things that has happened. And it's I'll tell you, it's a common thing. Every child, there are certain things they don't like in their parents, and they're like, I will never be that. And guess what? When they grow up, they're exactly that. So that, that's what I was trying to understand. Like, yes, I don't want to take association, but if I'm around them, then unconsciously there is something that's going to happen, and I worry about that. So the best we do is try it, I guess.
Yes, like I said, there's two sides of it. We have to understand both. We don't want to be, we don't want to completely dismiss it and just be like, whatever, that's, you should, and spend a whole lot of time with them. But at the same time, you don't want to spend no time with them. Right. So
just keep a good distance, at the same time maintain it. Yeah.
And then be careful that when there is that proximity, just be careful that you're not taking that association on that in that regard. Try to do something that will keep your consciousness what's the word? It's a very simple word. I lose words sometimes. Unaffected. I don't know why I lost that one. Unaffected by the materialism. So, but we have to be careful. And so So studying Shastra, taking the instructions of the Guru and following the examples of the sadhu is super important, because if we don't do that, then we will fall prey to these situations, and it won't be easy. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you very much, Prabhu. When you say anything else, there's just a lot more. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could discuss. But that last point, I think, is very important, especially when one of the instructions for us is that we should go out and preach. We are constantly going to be around people who are not in this way of thinking. So we have to learn how to be surrounded by them, but not be affected by them, and actually be effective in conveying this message. So that was just one of the things I was thinking about at the very end. There were quite a few other things, but it is 9:03, so I want to make sure that everybody has had a chance. Yes, Kalpesh Prabhu, go ahead. It is 9:03, so we need to be conscious of the time. Go ahead, Prabhu.
Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances. All glory to Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah, Prabhupada.
So speaking about the association, sometimes we often also think about the fault finding. We see wrong things on other very easily, but we are not able to see wrong things within ourselves.
Isn't
And
it funny how that works?
this is how the irresponsibility I have seen when it comes to association. It's very subjective and a very it is a very personal thing, and people may act irrationally. Sometimes it may become a self-destructive enough, and then they leave no room for experiencing the reality and its fullness. So because in this material world there will be the differences. The point is, we always think about differences, but we are not seeing the sameness. Differences, and I always think in back of my mind, how do I handle better my differences in all the relationships which I have the transaction in this world. So Prabhuji, if you can just explain, like there are a few points I told about the irresponsible behavior which I have seen from the devotees or practicing bhaktis, or when it comes to the association, it is very
Yeah.
how do we see
Well,
fault?
the first thing that'll help us is we have to reverse our current behavior. As you mentioned, it's easy for us to find faults in others, right? But we find that it's not that just we only recognize faults. It's just that we find faults in others. Now, we're also good at finding qualities, but we only find those in ourselves. We find the smallest thing that we did that was actually proper, and we say, oh, I did such a great job doing that. So it's not that we can't recognize good qualities. It's just that we're doing it in the wrong order. We're seeing the faults in others, and we're seeing the qualities in ourselves, and we're magnifying those. So we magnify the faults in others and magnify the qualities in ourselves. Now, if we do that in reverse, if we start, and it's still doing the same thing, you're still recognizing qualities and faults. You're just reversing who you're doing those to. So if we magnify the qualities of others and then associate with those qualities that we've magnified in others, and then we magnify the faults in ourselves, then we can see where we have to improve. So it actually helps us. We switch that. It doesn't mean that we should have low self-esteem. There's the difference between humility and low self-esteem is low self-esteem is you think less of yourself, and humility means that you think less of yourself, right? So one is you're actually thinking a lot about yourself. You're just thinking, oh, I'm the worst, but it's all self-centric. So that's low self-esteem. Humility is just, you're not really thinking of yourself. You're thinking of Krishna, something else, right? So if we do that, we're going to be in much better shape. And we can consciously do that because we can consciously catch ourselves finding faults in everyone else, right? And so when you were mentioning that, you know, the different behaviors of others, see the behaviors in yourself that aren't according to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, work on those. And then for everyone else, see what their qualities are, because what you want to learn from others is what can help you, right? So sure, sometimes we can learn from others' mistakes. We see that they're doing the wrong thing, and then we're inspired not to do. For example, even before I met the Vaishnavas, I vowed never to drink alcohol because I had a lot of family members that were terrible alcoholics. And so I learned from their mistakes. So that was one example of, you know, seeing a fault in someone else and then helping yourself to not get that fault. But in general, so it is a thing that we can do. But in general, especially with devotees, we should focus on their good qualities and figure out how to develop those within ourselves, because we don't have very many good qualities, honestly speaking. We think we do, because we have the flow is reversed on our assessment program. When we assess people's qualities or flaws, we magnify their flaws and we magnify our qualities. So if we reverse that, that'll help us actually a lot. Again, as long as we're not making it so we have low self-esteem. It's not that we should be down on ourselves. It's just that we should be realistic, you know, and because if we're only focusing on our qualities, we think we're in good shape. We don't have to do anything. You know, everyone else should be as good as I am, right? That's what we think in that situation. But when we reverse that, we say, oh, I have a lot to learn from them. I have a lot to learn from them. And here are some things within me that I definitely need to resolve. Right. So that's the first step in that. And then again, just Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra helps us to not fall into that low self-esteem thing. It actually helps us to become humble and helps us properly advance in spirituality. Did that answer your question, Kalpesh Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, good. I was actually, you know, when I was going to go through the Upadeshamrita verses 2 and 3 in the Bhakti Loka, I started remembering when I went through the Bhakti Shastri class last year and went through this section, it actually took like several days to get through. So there's no way we could have done it in this session anyway to its full extent. But hopefully we covered enough of it to inspire those who are sincerely trying to understand this deeper, to go ahead and read those books. And if anyone wants to talk at any time about this subject, I'm very passionate about this subject, if you haven't noticed. I'll be glad to have a conversation outside of class. But for now, since it's 9:10, I think we should probably wrap it up.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. I think from next month, I will probably assign 2 days for you instead of just one class, so we can.
2 days for one verse.
Yes. Thank you very much. And again, just as he said, if you have further questions, clarifications, please reach out to him. I think there is a reason why you are passionate. I think it is a very important subject for all of us too. And even in the chat box, I see Sati Mataji say that this is very true. I can relate to this. So it's very important. So thank you very much. So we'll meet again tomorrow morning at 7:50.
Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
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 Bhagavatam ki jai.
Hi.
Vanchakalpatrubhyas chakapasindubhyo Vaishnaveebhyo Namo Namaha.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you all again.